Welcome to the review of Busan 2, or Train to Busan 2, or as it is more commonly known, Peninsula, starring Gang Dong-won as Jung Seok, Lee Jung-hyun as Min-Jung, Lee Ri as Joon, Koo Kyo-hun as Captain Seo, Kwan Hae-hyo as Elder Kim, Min-jae as Sergeant First Class Hwang, and Lee Yeon as Yu-Jin, directed by Sang-ho-yeon and written by Joo-Suk Park and Sang-ho-yeon. Peninsula is the sequel to Train to Busan, and if you're interested in watching a review on Train to Busan, then the review of Train to Busan that we did is linked in the description below. So definitely go check that out, preferably before you check out this one for Peninsula, as it is the sequel to Train to Busan. Peninsula is very different to Train to Busan in not only feel and script, but in the way the film is laid out, with very different twists and turns and different ways in which it tells its story. It is not a direct link to Train to Busan, but it is still a sequel, picking up 4 years later after the events of Train to Busan has happened, as the film is actually released 4 years after Train to Busan was released. This is a great way to keep in with the zeitgeist of now and to keep people interested in what is happening. The beginning of the movie starts off with Jung Seok and some other survivors from South Korea living in Tokyo, Japan, where because they have escaped from a quarantine area, they are seen as second-class citizens, aren't allowed to work, and seem to be very much homeless, living in a place they thought was safe. Very much mirroring the way the blacks are being treated in China in 2020 due to the virus that cannot be named being released by the Chinese themselves in 2019. However, the Chinese are afraid that the blacks will help proliferate the virus being spread around China. Not quite sure how that works, and Peninsula does a great job at mirroring the way the blacks are being treated in China to the way the South Koreans are being treated by the people in Tokyo, because they have managed to survive the zombie apocalypse. The survivors, Jung Seok and his friends, and some other survivors from South Korea, due to not having any work and not being able to find any work, have to work for the gangsters and the mob of Japan, and they are sent back into South Korea to retrieve some lost goods for them. Now, whereas Train to Busan was very much 28 days later and very much a road trip movie with an emotional stance on it and an interesting take on zombies with some interesting twists and turns, and you never quite know what's going to happen from scene to scene, Peninsula unfolds very much like Escape from LA or Escape from New York or Mad Max and other films like that. It doesn't have as many twists or turns in it, but the atmosphere is still the same. The zombies are still the same, and the script itself is very good. It keeps you hooked, it keeps on going, it doesn't drop a beat, and it doesn't drop a bad dialogue bomb. As with Train to Busan, none of these scenes seem pointless. It never seems to lose its pace. It never seems to lose the atmosphere it creates, even though it does go from a single person's view to a family view, to the gangster's view, to the bad guy's view, to survivor's view. It all fits in nicely and tells a good, coherent, linear storyline. Whereas Train to Busan told a linear storyline of various and different characters, this one mainly sticks with its main characters all working together to overcome some of the guerrilla warfare people which have managed to survive in South Korea during the outbreak over the last 4 years. Now, this isn't a spoiler review, so I can't go too heavily into the actual storyline itself, but you have characters that have to deal with the guilt of surviving in South Korea and not having died or turned into a zombie with their loved ones. You have the guilt of what the army people had to go through and the fact that they had to leave people behind to help save people. You have the stigma of the people who have taken the survivors in, and you also have the harsh violence and reality of what the survivors have had to do to make sure that they survive in South Korea. It's not as emotional as the last one, but it does have its beats. There are certain points due to Train to Busan where you're not sure if people are going to survive or if they're going to die, or if the bad guy's going to win or if the good guy's going to lose. You just don't know because of Train to Busan. That isn't there with Peninsula because it does very much jump through the hoops it needs to tell its story. It's a more rounded, it's a less experimental, it's less pushing the genre, it's more giving the story of what happened to South Korea due to the zombie outbreak. You have very different characters as well. Jung Seok, played by Kang Dong-won, is somebody who is very much involved in his head, involved in his thoughts, and looks around and tries to take everything in he can. He is an army man, he has to keep on his toes, and he has to make sure that the mission he is on is done. Whereas the characters of Min-Jung, Joon, and Dong-hwan, played by Lee Jung-hyun, Lee Ri, and Moon Woo-jin, are more of a family collective. They show you how a family have managed to survive in this harsh environment, whilst they look out for Elder Kim, played by Kwan Hae-hyo, who is trying to reach the mainland so that they can send some army people in to help rescue them. However, with his character, they do play on what would happen to an elderly person who's managed to survive a zombie outbreak. His mind isn't quite there, and you're not quite sure if what he says is something he means or something he believes, or if it's just a delusion in his head and he's slowly crumbling and succumbing to something like dementia. And as any movie should have, they have a brilliant antagonist in the form of Sergeant First Class Hwang, played by Min-Jae, and his part is brilliant. He plays somebody who's managed to stay on top of everyone within the community through violence and through intimidation tactics and through being the best fighter and the best person to go out and try and do the missions to help the community survive. Whereas the person who is in charge of the community, Captain Seo, played by Koo Kyo-hwan, shows a different side of how to survive in the zombie apocalypse. He uses more of his intelligence, more of his brain, and tries to think about the multiple and different angles in which it's needed to control people who have lost everything and don't care about anything and have gone back to a primal, violent way of living. So they juxtapose themselves very nicely, the character of Captain Seo and Sergeant First Class Hwang. They juxtapose each other and they help the storyline continue on within the encampment of survivors. The script is very well done, with the correct pacing, the correct dark tones, and it builds up and slides you back down on a slower roller coaster and not nearly as heart-pounding as Train to Busan. But as I've said, Train to Busan is more of an emotional roller coaster, whereas this is more of an action-packed roller coaster, and the action does not let you down. some of the ways of Joon and Dong-hwan and Min-Jung have come up with to help survive the zombies and fend them off, and when they can't get around an attacker, the tools and implements they have created to help them are very intelligent, very entertaining, and very good twists. Whereas the way people like Captain Siu and Sergeant First Class Hwang have come up with defending themselves from the zombies and any other humans that might try to attack is very more army, very more rigid, very more confined, and it's a very good juxtaposition, especially when the action starts to get going and they're finally going through the streets full of zombies, running away from bad guys, trying to make sure they themselves aren't being eaten, trying to help each other survive. Each character also has their emotional resonance with the audience. The character of Gang Dong-won has to deal with the people he's left behind and the situation he finds himself in now, and compares it a lot to the life he has lost because of the zombie apocalypse. Min-jae has the emotional need and want to protect her family, make sure they're safe, and to either survive the zombie apocalypse as safely as possible or find a way to get out of South Korea. Sergeant First Class Hwang, he is just a brute of a man. He is somebody who will attack and wants. He is like the bad guy from The Walking Dead who was in charge of the clan that attacked the survivors of Walking Dead when they went to the prison. This is his kind of character. Just a nasty piece of work who likes violence, likes to see violence, and figures that this is what everybody else wants to see and what everybody else is entertained by. Whereas Captain Siu, he's more concerned with his personal safety and him personally surviving, depending on how many people are around him, and he tries to manipulate and move them. When you put yourself into a situation of trying to survive in an apocalyptic world, you can understand just how these different characters and their different aspects resonates with you. And it's pulled off very well with the writing, and I think very well with the acting. This film has a very good start, a very strong middle. The action scenes that break every part up and help the storyline continue on are very well executed, with some very good stunts and some interesting innovations to keep the zombies and other enemies at bay. The pacing is fantastic. The tone is just as good as the tone in Train to Busan. The ending is a nice, solid, good ending. It's nowhere near as good as Train to Busan, but then again, it would be personally impossible to top something like Train to Busan, which I gave a good 10 out of 10 rating. And if you haven't seen that review for Train to Busan, there is a link for it below in the description, so definitely go and check that out. But whereas Train to Busan was a 10 out of 10, I do kind of want to give Peninsula an 8 out of 10, but I think it's more of a 7 out of 10. Just because the twists aren't there, the emotional resonance with the storyline isn't there, but the characters are there, the directing is there, the pacing is there, the script is there along with the dialogue, and the roller coaster is also there, but nowhere near as much as Train to Busan, which was definitely an emotional roller coaster with some fantastic effects and really good action scenes. Like I say, Peninsula is more for the people that enjoy something like Escape from LA or Escape from New York or Mad Max, or kind of apocalyptic end of the world movie. Whereas Train to Busan is definitely more for the people that like a good zombie movie, like to have a good emotional breakdown throughout a movie and also really get invested with Train to Busan and its characters. You also get invested with the characters of Peninsula on an emotional level, and you do want to see how their storylines end. So it is a film that does grip you, but just not as much as Train to Busan. But it is definitely highly recommended to watch, even though it's not a sequel to Train to Busan, which once you see Peninsula, you'll understand what I mean. But it is still a sequel to Train to Busan, and Train to Busan is definitely a 10 out of 10 highly recommended movie. So you should definitely watch that one and Peninsula as well. Thank you very much for watching the No Spoils review of Peninsula, the sequel to Train to Busan. Please check out our channel for further reviews and interesting documentaries. Check out the link in the description for our review of Train to Busan. Remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and we will catch you laters.